Hello and welcome. I'm Ericka, Sallee, speaker, self-help author, transformation success coach, and owner of True Synergy. I am excited to be having this conversation with you here during Coffee and Conversation. As a result of my personal coaching and professional development programs, I help my clients, women and organizations, to figure out what stands in the way of their success. And so I get excited about being able to have these conversations here during Coffee and Conversation, because I know there are things that we often ponder and try to figure out when we're standing at the kitchen sink and we're trying to navigate through all of life's days and the things that are included in it, whether it's our children, our work, our spouses, and anything else in between. Then we often try to figure out, how do we handle all the stuff that comes our way? And so I decided that I wanted to bring those types of conversations here to Coffee and Conversation. And this being Mental Health Awareness Month, seems like the perfect time to bring my guest for this conversation here to talk with me. And I got to be honest with you, today, at this very moment that this conversation is being recorded, we are in the midst of yet another crisis in our country. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But I do want to take a moment to introduce my guest for this conversation, Dr. Paula Anderson. I just want to read a little bit of her bio because she is doing some amazing things. And I realize that during this time, it is best to have the experts come into this space and let's just talk about what this thing called mental health is all about. So, Dr. Paula Anderson is the founder, president, and CEO of PACE Consulting, an award-winning behavioral health counseling and organizational consulting firm. She is an organizational psychologist and a licensed clinical professional counselor in the state of Maryland, as well as a nationally certified counselor. Dr. Anderson is also certified to provide clinical supervision to postmaster's level professional counselors. She has over 20 years of experience providing individual, group, marriage and family therapy to children, adolescents, adults, and families. So without further ado, I just want to bring in Dr. Paula. Thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with me.
You are welcome. Nice to see you and nice to be here.
Yeah. We were talking backstage just a few moments ago and just kind of connecting on what is presently happening. When we scheduled this time together, we had our, just sort of like some general conversation and questions that I wanted to talk about, but realizing that in this moment, we are yet facing another mass shooting at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. And I thought, I need to have this conversation just because there's so much that my brain and your brain is trying to handle. So here we are trying to figure out, how are we feeling right now?
Yeah. Overwhelmed, frustrated, sad, um, sometimes a little helpless, right? It's just a lot happening. And I was sitting doing work, and I sometimes when I'm working from home, I do have the TV on just to, you know,
Have some back.
um, just have some sound in the background because it gets
Mm-hmm.
lonely when you're working from home sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that in the background, and I was like, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no. And then I had to really look at the screen because I saw 14 and 1, and I didn't know what the numbers meant until I really started listening and heard that 14 babies
Yeah.
died today for no
Yeah.
reason.
And I've been crying for the last couple hours.
Mhm.
My son was playing a video game and I thought I heard like, what game are you playing? Because if it's, Fortnite or something like that, I need you to turn that off.
Mm.
And he was unaware of what had happened. And I said, this is what just happened. And I really need you to turn that off because it was just triggering all these emotions.
Yeah.
And I wasn't ready for that. And
Mhm.
I'm thinking, I'm just on the outside. And here you have families who are dealing with this. And it is just frustrating. As you said, it makes me angry. It makes me mad. It
Mhm.
makes me say,
Mhm.
what in the world is it going to take for us to get to better than this.
Yeah. I, I-
So
yeah. I don't know if that's a question, but I think the answer is I don't know. I mean, I'm a spiritual person, so I would say lots of prayer, but even with that, it's like people have to really take individual responsibility to do no harm to others,
yeah,
right? Like you have to intentionally get a gun, intentionally walk, drive to a school, intentionally,
mhm,
that this is planned.
yes,
You know
yeah,
what I mean? And so you have to like individuals have to take personal responsibilities. And I'm not gonna hurt any like these kids did nothing to that
yes,
person.
absolutely, yeah. And I think that the layers underneath of this conversation are so deep and really transcend anything that we can solve in this space, because I do believe there is what do you call, a legal component, there is a
Yeah.
rational component, and there's so much. And so my prayer is not just for the families and not just for those of us who are constantly traumatized by hearing of it, but
Hmm.
it's really for those people who have more power than what you and I have sitting in this space right now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
Because I think that's the real
Yeah.
issue. And
Yeah.
so I appreciate you for just allowing me to just open up this space with just this is how I'm feeling. And I was like, I don't know how this is gonna go, because my
Yeah.
emotions are just so wound into everything that's happening. And so I think is a real conversation to have, because when we talk about mental health,
Mm.
there's so many different components and layers. And so one of my questions to you, Dr. Paula, is what's the biggest myth, and maybe there's more than one, but what's the biggest myth about mental health and mental health awareness, especially from what you see every day?
Yeah. I would say even before I get to the myth question, I want to clear up, just do like a little definition sharing and just talking about the difference between mental health and mental illness.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, so mental health is basically we all have mental health, right? It's a state of mental well-being.
Hmm.
A person with mental health, they realize their own abilities, they are able to cope, they can work productively and make a contribution to his or her society, right? When you have a mental illness, that's a medically diagnosable, illness where basically you have like a significant impairment of an individual's cognitive or emotional or relational abilities, right? So there's a difference. So we all have mental health. We all come to this space with mental health, this earth, right? We all have mental health, but then it can either happen biologically or environmentally, where somewhere along the line the brain gets affected and it can lead to a mental illness, right? And so when you ask about a myth about mental health, I'm like, the thing I could think about is the first thing that comes to mind is that people are like, oh, if you have mental health issues, you're crazy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I do therapists do not like that word. And
Understandably so, yeah.
right? And I don't like it. And I'm like, crazy. Well, if you think about the word mental health, it's really a state of mental well being, right?
Hmm.
So someone that has a mental health issue has a like something is going on with their regular functioning, right? So does that make somebody crazy that something is going on with the way that they function?
Hmm.
And there's plenty of people who have mental illnesses that you would never know because they are productive, part of our society. They are people that are leading big companies and leading our world, really, right? And so you have to really think about like what does that mean, like what does the word crazy mean? And so I think about that a lot when I hear about a myth. I'm like, yeah, just remove that word crazy from your vocabulary.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that. And actually, as you were talking, I thought sometimes we kind of use the two terms interchangeably.
Yeah, we
One
do.
of the things that you started off with is making that distinction, and I think that
Mhm.
might be a myth within and of itself, is that it's
Right,
all one thing, and it really isn't. So
right,
you
right.
make that distinction is certainly appreciated and helps to clarify for
Yeah,
people to know we all have our mental well-being is how
yeah,
we process and manage day
yep,
to day, and then mental illness is an extension of that in a way that people need more and may
yeah,
require certain other components to help them, to help support them. So thank you for that.
yeah. No worries.
So one of the things that, if we look at the news and we think about people like Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, and I was
Mhm.
just watching something recently about P. Diddy, and he was basically saying how he's coming out of this space that he was in. And he
Hmm.
said, 2020 really kind of took me to a place. It sounded like he didn't want to do anything with music. He just was kind of in a darker place than what he's ever experienced. And I thought, when we see the names behind mental health and mental health awareness, it does bring more of a present conversation to it.
Yeah.
So, my question is, how do we then remove the stigma around mental health awareness or mental illness, whichever,
Mhm.
either
Yeah.
one, so that we're present to the fact that this is real? It's not something that we should shun or shouldn't talk about.
Yeah. I love that you brought up like P. Diddy, and you brought up Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles, and really people that are well known, right? And people that people look up to, really, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I think by doing what they're doing, is like sharing, like being open about it. Because before, like, the stigma comes when you're like all secretive and like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to talk about this because there's some mystique behind mental illness, or mental health. We'll just use mental health just for for this conversation, right? And when people don't talk about it, it brings like this mystique, like something is wrong with you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I love that you asked that question, because I'm a big like stigma breaker. I'm like, look, we
Okay.
all have mental health. We just established that, right?
Yeah.
There's some times where, look, we just had a pandemic, so it's not a surprise that P. Diddy was feeling what he was feeling. We all just went through this collective trauma, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so our brains, our bodies is not used to just staying in the house all day long, staring at the four walls,
Right. Right.
right?
Exactly.
So that is a change that we had
Mm-hmm.
to get adjusted to. And some people adjusted just fine. Some people just carried on like, hey, I'm good. I'm good staying at home.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, it really did
Really.
affect their mental health.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're talking about it, I think helps break the stigma, because people are starting to see it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, your
Yeah.
brain is a part of your body, is a part of, your heart is a part of your, like you're not afraid to talk about if you're having heart issues, or if you're having lung issues, or if you're
Mm-hmm.
have diabetes. But people are so afraid to talk about mental health, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just, I think the more people talk about it, the more the stigma can be broken. So
Yeah.
sorry, I think I cut you off.
No, no, no. And I appreciate that because I think you're absolutely right. The moment that I started thinking about, and then there's so many others. I was also looking at an interview with another young woman. I'll talk about her in a minute. But I thought, so we have to have prominent people to raise awareness to something that is really not new. I mean, it's not new at all. But the one thing that I can say is COVID, with as traumatic as it has been, the
Mm,
one thing that I think it has done is to
yeah.
raise this
Yep.
space of conversation for anxiety, frustration,
Yep.
and really recognizing that people are traumatized
Hmm.
by a varying level of things.
Yeah.
The pandemic was something that, as you said, we've never experienced it before. And
No.
everything we knew about our lives as normal
Right.
became something we couldn't identify.
Right.
So,
Right.
from that perspective, what is some of the, and I call it post traumatic COVID disorder? Are
Hmm.
you seeing people who are now coming out of the woodwork, so to speak,
Yeah.
who are still feeling the effects of what COVID has done in terms of lockdown and all the other the deaths, the sicknesses, all of that? So, what are you seeing now that we are hopefully coming out of it?
There's a term called post pandemic stress disorder, which is
Ah,
very similar. It's not
okay.
it's not coined, and it's not in the DSM-5, which is like the Bible of mental health. It's not there yet, but someone has come up with that term, and it's very similar to post traumatic stress disorder, where you're seeing anxiety, you're seeing like lack of sleep, appetite affected, low moods. So it has the same symptoms. And I think what we're seeing, honestly, I know this was we've kind of seen this before, but I don't know if you're noticing, but like I think people are more on edge,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
easily irritated.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we're seeing, and I'm not equating the mass shootings to this, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It very much could be a
Yeah.
correlation, right? I
Right.
don't know, but there definitely could be a correlation. And so you're just seeing, like to me, I'm just seeing people being like, we were talking the other day, I was having a conversation about people being mean. Like there's like this mean spirit. Not everyone, I don't want to make this a
Right.
blanket statement, but you're starting to see like this rise of people being just mean to each other, angry, irritable,
Mm-hmm.
and like leaving no space for like grace. Right?
And
And
that's important though. That what you just
yeah,
said is important.
yeah.
Leaving no space for grace.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, unfortunately, I try to be mindful of the fact that in having these conversations, I try to not make it a political conversation.
Yeah.
But I would be remiss if I did not say that our climate was set before COVID hit. And so you've got the social unrest, you've got the political
Yep.
climate
Yep.
time, and then COVID all converging together. And I think that somewhere in there, it almost gave people permission
Yep.
to be and to say and to just put it all out there. And
Yeah.
I posted something yesterday because I was talking about freedom of speech and hurtful words.
Yeah.
Basically, there is a difference, and I think people misconstrue freedom of speech for I can say anything, but
Whatever.
I was connecting it to the fact that when you use hurtful words against another person or group of people,
Hmm.
that's traumatizing. So to tie it into the mental health space, we have no idea what that does to our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at the climate, it does, I do agree with you that
Yeah.
people are angry and they are just lashing out and short tempered. And it's a
Yeah.
scary feeling to know that that's what's happening.
Yeah. And I think what COVID did, it just kind of it bubbled everything to the top because I think people were able to kind of stay still, and you're either staying still being productive or staying still like not doing well or staying still plotting something, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yes.
And so, and then you, like you said, this environment, and I know exactly what you're talking about. This environment kind of like fed to those people who already had hate in their heart or racism or whatever it was. And it's like, it's just all bubbles to the top. And so what we saw was just like this, I call it the perfect storm.
Yeah, that is the perfect
It was a
storm.
perfect storm. And as you saw what happened, now some good has come from it, right? Like you're seeing a lot of initiatives come from it. But now what we're seeing on in the mental health side is that there's a lot of like you said, like I said, anger, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. Um, Less people are less tolerant of one another.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're seeing. And I think another thing that we're seeing too is just a lot of loneliness.
Mm, mm-hmm.
People have been, at this long, two going on three, if you
Yeah,
will.
yeah,
Yeah, people
yeah,
are
we
out
do.
talking about we outside, right? But
Right.
if you will, like with this surge, we're going to be back inside.
Well, and yeah, I've been thinking about that. I'm looking at and hearing the buzz about numbers going up and seeing a few emails that came through today, and I thought, oh gosh, and I don't. It's almost like, can we handle that?
Yeah,
Like, if God forbid, if it gets to that point, like it's almost like the cycle is a continuing hamster wheel, if you will. So my
yeah,
prayer is that we
yeah,
we we stay away from that point, but it's definitely something we have to kind of think about, like where am I? What's happening? Which I guess
yeah.
leads me to my next question, and
Hmm.
that is how I know we all heard about the suicide of Chesley Chris, and I know that her family has been very vocal with sharing and bringing awareness to the conversation around mental illness, because now we're talking about mental illness, right?
Hmm. I didn't hear the name
So,
you said. I'm sorry, the name.
oh, Chesley Chris,
Okay.
she was a Miss Miss.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
yeah,
The name. Yes, I know
that's
exactly.
okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I yeah, so many things, and I like her face just comes into my head, and you think to yourself,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
So I want to talk about that a little bit because I heard that she suffered from high functioning depression.
Mm,
And so my question is, could you explain what that is, number one? And then
mhm.
how do you distinguish that from, somebody who's just excited about life and, as opposed to being or feeling like you can't survive it? And I
Yeah.
guess I asked this question because we're talking about mental health, which we all have, mental illness, which is
Mhm,
something that requires a little bit more. There's a diagnosis involved.
mhm.
So when we talk about high functioning depression, how do you pinpoint one over the other in that diagnosis? Am I asking that question clearly?
Yeah. So with
Like, how
the
do
high,
you know if it's that or just somebody who is just bubbly and excited and happy and they're not masking something else, which sounds like that's what was happening in her world?
yeah, and I think yeah, when you think about depression, it's one of those things where it's like, we use the term so broadly, right? And so even the
Mm-hmm.
high functioning depression, it's not, and not that I can recall in our DSM, like major depressive disorders in our DSM. So that's a diagnosable condition where you have to have like 5 or more symptoms of the depression symptoms to be diagnosed with it over a 2 week period, right? So like what we're seeing with this high functioning depression is that it kind of like resembles, or most people who are have the term high functioning depression, it kind of resembles dysthymia, which is like a low grade depression.
Okay.
So
Okay.
low grade depression, like it's more like, like just some feelings of sadness,
Mm-hmm.
fatigue, like low mood, but it usually doesn't have like a suicidal component. Like the major depressive disorder, the diagnosable one, usually has a suicidal component. The dysthymia or the persistent depressive disorder doesn't usually have a you know, it's a low grade, let's just say a low grade to the major depression, right?
Okay.
And so when you have a low grade depression, like they're fine. Like they can function and, like perform, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
In public, I'm doing great. Everything is awesome. Everything is well. But then
Mm-hmm.
when like internally or behind the scenes, they
It's
may be sad, right? They may have like maybe really tired and not even sure why they're so tired, right?
mm-hmm.
They may have like this low mood, but with this dysthymia or low grade depression, like that can go on for 2 years.
Okay.
So just think of like, like you're feeling symptoms of depression, but it's like various, it's like like a slow drip,
Got it.
a slow dripping faucet,
Got
right?
it.
It's like drip. So you're like, oh, I'm good. Like I'm not sleeping all day. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
thinking of killing myself. I'm like, you think, oh, I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
But really it's still it's a low grade depression. And if you're not aware of it, it can
Mm-hmm.
really pass you by because you're like, I'm just tired, or I just don't feel good today, or you know what I mean? But it's
Mm-hmm.
a low grade depression is 2 years. You can actually feel that for 2 years.
Wow. So you just said something, and I want to ask this. So you said if you're not aware of it.
Yeah.
So how do we become aware of it? Like, what is the thing that says to us, okay, I'm not sleeping all day, but here's what I'm doing, and maybe I
Mm,
should think about like what should we tune into within ourselves to help us distinguish
yeah.
that this might be something that I should talk to somebody about? Like, how do you make that determination?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think like you wouldn't, like I'll just take myself. Like I wouldn't go to a doctor if I was just kind of feeling just sad for a day or two, or maybe not because sometimes with low grade depression it's not all at one time. You may feel it like, here, and then another 2 weeks later you feel it again. So I wouldn't put it together. But one thing I do encourage people to do, I don't care who you are, like
Mm-hmm.
when you're in your doctor's appointment, you have an annual physical, and everyone
Mm-hmm.
should be going to their annual physical. you
Right.
know you you may want to mention some things. And one thing that I know that medical doctors are doing now, which I really appreciate, they're doing like they're doing like a short depression
Yep.
screening.
There's a little survey that you have to fill out when you.
Yep.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I so appreciate that, because that way you can catch stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're just asking me, oh, how are you doing? I'm gonna say, oh, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
If, if I'm not feeling like a pain in my headache or neck pain, or I'm like, oh, I'm good. But with this, it can ask you very specific questions, and if it can say, are you always tired? Well, yeah, I am. Do you always have a low mood? Well, I've been feeling, I mean, like before, like if you just ask me a general question, I'm not going to pinpoint those
Right.
things.
Exactly. And of course, the hope is that people will answer
We'll
those
answer you
surveys
honest,
with
right, right,
honestly. Let me say that.
honestly, right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think too, with just like, and I think you kind of asked this before, but with general education, right? Like really, like people, you're gonna laugh at me, but people, both of us, I don't think we're like in our 20s, right? But
Correct.
right,
Well,
right,
that's multiply
right,
20s by some.
right. So okay, you're 28, I'm 29. Okay, so right. And so people like look, some of my friends like, you're on social media, and I'm like, you know what? I actually learn a lot from social media. That when you follow like reliable sources, and
Yes.
your social media feed can kind of be going. There's so much good information on mental health. Like
Mm-hmm.
even me as a clinician, I'm like some sites, I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like if you're on something a lot, like follow those sites that are reputable. Like I would say, like NAMI is one, National Alliance of Mental Illness. Another one is NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health. You know what I mean? There's so many great sites to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get reputable information. And so I really I think when you educate yourself, so whether that's Google or social media or the news or whatever, wherever you're getting your information from, or talking to your doctor, like what's a good resource, right? Ask the questions, because we are living in uncertain times and different things are happening as we've never experienced before. So our bodies are going to naturally react differently. So I think even now would be more to be really in tune with your body and be in tune with the resources that may be able to help you address
Yeah.
some things
And I
that you're
think
experiencing.
you bring up a great point. And I know we could probably have this conversation for an extended period of time, and I want to honor your time, but I think it's important, as you said, to just know, like, be in tune with yourself. Know what you're feeling, know what you're thinking. When you asked me earlier, how are you doing?
Mhm.
In the past, I probably would have said, oh, I'm good. But today I said, I'm
You were
not
honest.
okay.
Yeah, and I appreciated that. Yep.
And I'm learning how to do that. Like, I'm a person who, motivation, inspiration is a part of who I am. It's what
Yeah.
True Synergy is all about. But I
Yes.
also recognize that there are moments when, shit's happening and you're just like, I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
knowing today what happened at the elementary school, I had to say to you, I'm like, you know what, Dr. Paula, I feel like this is something that I need just to connect with somebody else to talk about it. So
Mm,
knowing yourself,
yes.
when you're frustrated, knowing when you're angry,
Yep.
and connecting to that to say, okay, this is how I'm feeling. Now the next question I have is, once you do that, then what? So if someone says, okay, I'm connecting with myself, this is how I'm feeling, so what am I supposed to do that with that when I figure out I'm angry, I'm mad, I'm frustrated? What would we say to a person who is in touch with what they're feeling? Where do
Yeah.
they go from there?
Yeah. I would say, like, I'll give an example. Like, I'll give you the work from home example. I hope I don't take too long to answer this.
That's
But
okay.
like for me, I'm I'm an extrovert, right? And if I stay at home too long by myself, I start feeling down. I don't feel right. And so for me, I know what I have to do. Like I still have my office, right? So I'm going to the office the rest of the week, because
Mm,
I cannot stay at home too long, because I know myself. I start to feel down. The TV's on. I start seeing just all the
Mhm.
stuff that's happening. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
can't be in here. Right. So knowing yourself and then knowing what to do, like knowing what coping skills to work. Right. So for me, I have an office to go to. Somebody else may not have an office. So maybe you need to turn off the TV, put on some music. Maybe you need to, start journaling. Maybe you need
Mhm.
to go for a walk outside. Maybe you need to go outside and get some lunch instead of eating lunch from home. Do you see what
Mhm.
I'm saying? So everybody has a different coping skill that's going to kind of refresh them and help them to feel better in that moment.
Mhm.
Now, if there is a true mental illness happening and you don't know, if you start feeling like like I can't even get out of bed, like I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating, like I've lost 10 pounds. I mean, if you've seen like things that are kind of like affecting your activities of daily living,
Mhm.
that's a red flag to be like, you know what, let me go make an appointment with my doctor, talk
Yeah.
to my doctor, tell them what I'm feeling, and then they would in turn say, hey, let's run a test. It could be thyroids for all we know, our hormone issue, right?
Yeah.
Or it could be a mental illness. So let's talk to the doctor so that they could like run the test and see which way to treat you. So I always tell people go to your doctor first because
You
they can
just
come.
brought up another a point that I don't want to miss, and that is how connected the mind and the body are.
Oh
So
yes.
what you just said was you might be feeling something that feels like it's a mood change, and is this that low grade depression, or
Mm-hmm.
is it something else that my body is responding to hormonally,
Mm.
and that needs to be addressed.
Yep.
So at the end of the day, I think what you're saying is spot on. Is just at, this is a time where if we never paid attention to ourselves, what we like, what we're used to, how our body is used to functioning, how our mind is used to functioning, this is the time to really tap into that,
Yeah, for
because
sure.
the mental health awareness part is exactly that,
Yes. Yep.
right?
I'm
So
aware. Yep.
not just knowing that, oh, there's this thing out there called mental health awareness, and May happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month. It is no.
Mm. Right.
We all have a responsibility to be aware of our own mental health and well-being, and not be afraid to take it a step further when we do check in with ourselves to say, hey, you know what, let me figure out what's going on here.
Absolutely. There was some background noise. I'm sorry. But yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the awareness piece, knowing yourself is going to be key here. Right. So I think another thing COVID has done has kept us still enough so you can know yourself. Right. So because
Mhm.
before we were like running, 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 we don't notice anything. Right now, I can tell you everything that's going on with my, but because I've been home. So I've
Yeah.
had to really pay attention to what's going on with internally, externally, what I'm eating, what I'm not eating, being intentional.
Mhm.
So that awareness is what, just like you said, Ericka, is key. So you know your body and like, is there a shift this today? Is there a shift this week? Is there a shift this month? Right. So really, really paying attention.
Yeah, I think if people don't get anything else from this conversation, it is how can I be more aware of me so
Mm-hmm.
that I know what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and then I can figure out, well, if it's, as you said, picking up the phone to call somebody, whether it's a friend or a spouse, or
Mm-hmm.
as you said, stepping outside to go for a walk, or
Mm-hmm.
journaling, or watching what you eat, because what we eat does
Mm-hmm.
affect. That's a whole nother
That's a
conversation.
whole conversation.
Yeah, what we eat does affect how we think and how our bodies perform, and so that's another thing to be mindful of.
Yeah.
I want to just finalize, because again, I want to honor your time, and I know we are coming close to the time to wrap up. But here's what I want to ask as we close out. Going back to Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, um, I was listening to an interview with she's an NFL. I shouldn't say NFL. She's a sports analyst. Her name is Kimmy Checks. And one of the things that struck me in the conversation, this was probably during Super Bowl time, and she was basically saying that as a Black woman, her need to feel like I've got to get it right. I can't make a mistake because I'm being looked at, number one, as can she perform? Is she as good as? And when I listened to that, and she's an amazing analyst, I thought to myself, how many times do we have to own up to something and that pressure that is then put on us, which then impacts our mental well-being? How do you see, and this is in the world of people that we know, like, the Simone Biles, and how she had to step back and got some ridicule from some people, but for the most part, I think she was supported by her decision to step out of that last event. So how do we address that part, trying to own up to something and making decisions based on what other people think we should do, and managing our mental health in the process?
That's a loaded question.
Okay. Okay.
It's loaded. And I think, as a Black woman, right? Gosh, as Black people in general, we've just had to just do so much more to prove that, that for us to be accepted or that we
Yes,
belong, right? And that's a whole other topic, Ericka. but,
it is.
but I,
And you know what? And you're right. I think there's so much that I wanted to kind of get in there. So I
yeah,
think you're right. So let me unload a little bit. Let me
yeah,
unpack.
yeah, yeah.
So the pressure. So there's two pieces of it. There's the pressure of, I'm the athlete, I'm the actor, I'm the whatever this is, and there is an expectation that I do X, Y, and Z, and never mind my mental health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So let me break it down this way. I heard a story today, as a matter of fact, and I wrote his name down because I hadn't heard this story before. Um, his name is Drew Robinson. He's a baseball player who, in 2020, he attempted suicide, and he shot himself in the head, and he lived to tell the story.
Whoa.
So basically, now he is a part of the San Francisco Giants organization, not as a baseball player, but as a mental health advocate. So I'm asking the question about going back to Simone and Naomi and other athletes who we probably haven't heard from, who also are trying to manage this mental health space. So when you think about health advocate, do you think that it's beneficial for not just major league or minor league baseball teams to have that kind of support? But what is your thought around that in any industry?
I think that's an important piece, right? Because I think whether you're an athlete or you're an entertainer or you do what we do, right? We help people. We're in the helping profession. You coach, I counsel, you help organizations, I help organizations. Like, we are going to push ourselves to be excellent, right? But then there comes a point where you may push yourself too much, and then that advocate or that mental health therapist, whoever you're working with, is going to just help you and remind you that, what I used the word grace earlier. You need to give yourself some grace, right? Like, you're not a machine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you don't want to push yourself to the brink of becoming unhealthy. And I think that's what sometimes that we as humans do. And I think even people of color, because we've had to prove ourselves in so many spaces, like we kind of push ourselves to the point where we can become unwell. And that's where we have to kind of take back and take self-care so seriously and make it priority. Because if you push yourself, to make sure that this organization does well or your team does well, but then you're not well, then is it worth it?
That's right. Yeah, and I think that goes back to the physical and the mental aspect, marrying those two together. So I think in that loaded question, I was like looking, and you're right, it was. There's so many things I was trying to put out there. But at the end of the day, I think what you're basically saying is, it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're an athlete,
Yep.
actor, actress, entertainer, whatever industry you're in,
Yeah.
making sure that you check in with yourself. And I do think it's helpful for any industry, to have a mental health advocate. So whether it's an organization that has employee assistance program, or
Yep.
designated person assigned to, a larger conglomerate, if you will.
Yeah,
That is what's important. And I think it's okay for us to know that that is an okay part of a benefit that we need for ourselves.
absolutely. And I applaud that the Giants for having that.
Yeah, when I heard that, I
That's
thought, really? I mean, the
that's
story itself was
awesome.
intriguing, and just to hear it today, knowing that I was going to be talking to you, was something that I wanted to bring to the forefront. So,
Yeah.
Dr. Paula, I
Yes.
know there's so much more we could talk about. Time is of the essence, but I do want to let people know how they can get in touch with you. You do see Dr. Paula's website at the bottom of the screen there, so that if you have questions or you want to seek out some services that she provides, then this is how you can connect with her. I also want to be mindful that there are some other resources,
Mhm.
to address the mental illness part of the conversation. If you or anyone that you know
Yes.
needs to speak with someone uh,
Yes.
to save your life, or you help to save the life of someone else, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number is also at the bottom of your screen. I do also want to share another resource that I think is very valuable. Thank you, Dr. Paula, for the
Yes.
mentalhealth.gov website. There's so many different resources within that site: suicide prevention, disaster distress helpline. There's space for veterans, coping with COVID-19.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different ways that you or someone you know can get help if you need it. And then, of course, some of the other things that we talked about, really just connecting on a day-to-day basis, understanding what you're feeling, what you're thinking, changing up your routine, seeking out conversations with people that you feel close to, your doctor, making sure that you use your doctor as your resource is important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
so, Dr. Paula, any final thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up the conversation?
Yeah, I think just what we've been saying is just, just keep be take care of yourself and stay
Mhm.
aware of your body and what's going in it,
Yeah.
and what and how you're feeling, on a daily basis, because it's important. Things are, like I said, things are happening every day, and you have to also know, like, when to turn things off, right? Because, like I
Mhm.
said, sometimes the news can be very triggering. Social media could be triggering. Your phone could be triggering. So you may want to put some of those things aside so that you can just, take care of yourself. So,
Yeah, creating those boundaries is also
yeah.
very key, and so I appreciate you saying that as well. So I
Mhm.
do want to thank you again, Dr. Paula, and I also
Yeah.
want to let our viewers know that if you have questions about all things wellness, if you have questions about how do I create the best version of myself, I'm in this space, I'm not sure what's next, then I do encourage you to reach out to me at truesynergy.org. You can also be on the lookout, as one of the things that's very important to me is this whole concept of healthy living. And
Mm.
healthy living is really a part of what we're talking about. Mental health is a part of that healthy living space. And so I'm going to be launching healthy living program. It's an online program, a holistic approach to self-care and well-being. So be on the lookout for more information on that. That will be launching July the 27th. So I do encourage you to stay connected in my social media space to find out more about that. And so, Dr. Paula, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you. I appreciate the conversation. And so, for all of you who have heard this, I hope that you got something from today's conversation. Please do share it out with those that you think may need to hear it also. And I look forward to seeing you all again real soon. Until I do, take care and be well.